Resourceful Designer, episode 237. Say they can't have it, and they'll want it more.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He thinks he might look good bald, but hasn't had the guts to try it. Mark Descout.
Yeah, I came very close towards the start of the COVID lockdown when I couldn't go get a haircut at my normal place. I did order an electric hair trimmer from Amazon, and I cut my hair to about just a little bit under a quarter inch or about 5 millimeters. But that's as far as I went. But I think after seeing that, I would look kind of good bald. At least in my opinion, I think I would. Anyways, in this episode, I'm going to share an easy way to, and I put this in quotes, manipulate people so that you can get more or at least better work. And I'm also going to share a resource to help you figure out what fonts a website is using. Now, what have I been up to? Well, I mentioned in the last episode how I was doing the Instagram Reels. Well, I kind of slipped on that. I was doing them every day. They're short 30-second videos. I was putting them out on Instagram Reels. And I was doing them daily. And I did that for a few weeks, but then this past week I missed a few days. Actually, it's been a couple of days since I put one out. I do plan on continuing them. I just don't know if it'll be on a daily basis anymore. I know 30 seconds doesn't seem like much, but there's a lot of thought that has to go into them, and sometimes several takes to get what I want to say within 30 seconds. And crazy as it sounds, some days I just don't have the time to do it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be following me on Instagram. Just look for Resourceful Designer and give me a follow. I'd appreciate it. Now, other than that, I was dealing with a really strange CSS problem with a website this week. I was trying to do something that, in theory, I should have been able to do in 5-10 minutes. All I wanted to do is take an image that was part of a plugin. This plugin I put onto a website. It's actually the Divi Blog Extra plugin. So it's to create blog posts, but not the one that comes with Divi. It's an extra plugin that does some extra things I'm not going to get into. But all I wanted to do was the featured image that shows up whenever it shows the grid view of all the different blog posts. By default, it's a rectangle, and I wanted that image to be square. And you'd think that would be such an easy thing to do. But it took me several hours of digging, and I got other people involved, people who really know their CSS, to look at it. And we could not figure out how to get the image to turn square. Everything in our minds, everything we were doing should have worked, but it wasn't. I mean, in the long run, I ended up fixing the problem by actually opening up the actual CSS file, the style file that came with the plugin, and editing it, which is not something I like to do. I prefer to do all my edits either in the Divi theme option panel or create a child theme and add it to that CSS file. I rarely will ever go alter the files that came from the plugin, but in this case, it was the only way we could figure out how to do it. So that took several hours of my day for something that should have only taken a few minutes. But that's one of the things that happens when you're running a business. You run into these problems, and what can you do? But besides that, I worked on a couple of other websites. I still didn't get around to working on mine. There's a few things I want to do to my own website. I haven't had a chance to do that. I did work on some podcast artwork. One of them has been approved already. The other one wants some minor changes to it, and I'm still waiting to hear back on the third one. So the podcast branding side of my business has been going strong. Marksman Design side, my regular design business, I haven't had a new client or anything in a while, but then again, I am not pushing it as much. But I haven't had any new work come in on that side, so I'm glad the podcast branding business that I started is keeping me busy. Speaking of keeping me busy, I'm very busy in the Resourceful Designer community. I'm not going to get too much into it here. As you may or may not know, the community, I closed it to new members. I will reopen it again in early 2021. And I already have several names on a waiting list to be notified when it does reopen. So in case you're unaware, the community is just a group of dedicated designers, all in there helping each other out. We're all at various stages of our career. But it's a small, close-knit community that allows us to really get to know each other and help each other out much more so than in a large group with thousands of people. And that's one of the things that's great about the community. It's a small group. I don't want it to grow into hundreds and hundreds of designers or anything like that. I want to keep it small. And right now I closed the community in order to just see how things are going as is. And I do plan on opening it in 2021, but I'm not sure for how long, or I probably will be capping how many people join the community. And once we reach that level, I'll close it again. So anyways, all of this to say, if you are interested in joining when it does reopen, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community and sign up to be notified. And then it'll be on a first come, first serve basis. And now this week's resource of the week. And this week's resource is fontofweb.com. And this is a very simple website that could actually, I could have included this if I would have known about it in my One Trick Pony episode. But all this website does is you type in the URL for a website and it will tell you what fonts are being used on the site. So if you ever come across a site and go, oh, I really like that font they're using, I wonder what font that is, no need to go digging through source code or anything like that. You just type in the URL in this website. Again, that's fontofweb.com. And it lays out not just telling you what fonts, but it'll tell you that the H1 uses this, the H2 uses that, this span uses this, that span uses that. So it gives you a good list. It also gives you a link where you can download that particular font wherever it's available. So if it's a Google font, it'll link to that. If it's from another font foundry, it'll link to that. So really convenient. I only just recently found out about this website, and I've already used it a couple of times, just examining a site going, I really like that font. Maybe I'd like to use that font on a next web build that I do. And I just plug it in, find out what the font is. So once again, that is fontofweb.com. And if you do forget, the link to it will be in the show notes for this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 237. And now, say they can't have it, and they'll want it even more. Have you ever heard of the term reactance? And I'm not talking about reactance when it comes to electronic circuits, because that's a type of reactance that I don't understand. What I'm talking about is psychological reactance. Now, according to Wikipedia, psychological reactance is an unpleasant motivational arousal or reaction to offers, persons, rules, or regulations that threatens or eliminates specific behavioral freedoms. Reactance occurs when a person feels that someone or something is taking away their choice or limiting the range of alternatives. So this last part is what really comes into play in today's topic. When a person feels that someone is taking away their choices or limiting the range of alternatives. In other words, say they can't have it, and they'll want it even more. Just look throughout history. People are constantly doing things they're told that they can't or shouldn't do. Take books, for example. You may have heard of books such as To Kill a Mockingbird, The Great Gatsby, or Catcher in the Rye. These are all books that at one time or another were banned from school systems or just banned in general. And what happened because of these bans? All three of these books are some of the most purchased books of all time. When prohibition was put in place in the USA in the 1920s, which ran for well over a decade, and prohibition banned the production, importation, transportation, and the sale of alcoholic beverages, well, what do you think happened? More alcohol was produced and distributed during that time than ever before. When you tell someone they can't have it, they want it even more. Tell a child that they can't have a cookie? All they'll be able to think about is that cookie they can't have. I used to use a trick with my kids when they were young. When things got out of hand in their rooms, I would say something like, I know you don't want to clean your room, and that's too bad. It would have been a nice surprise to come in here and see it all nice and tidy. And I would just leave it at that. And almost every time, Kim and I would later get called into my son or my daughter's room, whichever one, and we would act all surprised that they had put away all their things that had been lying around and making their room a mess. Not because I asked them to do it, because I told them, I know you don't want to do it. And that's what made them do it. That's psychological reactance. So how does this apply to running a design business? Well, it's simple. Tell a client they can't have something or something isn't for them, and there's a really good chance they'll want it even more. So what do I mean by this? Let's say a client comes to you for a logo design and they tell you that they only have, and we'll just use nice round numbers here, they only have $500 to spend. Think back to episode 145 of the podcast when I told you about the 3-tier pricing method. Now, if you haven't listened to that episode or if you don't remember it, I suggest you go back and listen to it, and you can find that at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 145. It's actually one of the top episodes of the podcast and one that I get the most feedback on. I hear all the time from people saying how that episode changed the way that they run their business and thanking me because they can't believe on how much better work they're getting because of using that pricing method. But in case you're unfamiliar with it, I'm not going to make you go listen to it right now, just add it to your queue. But the 3-tier pricing method, in a nutshell, is when you offer 3 different options to a client, each one consisting of a slightly bigger package, if you want to call it that, at a slightly higher price. For example, you could offer a logo design for $500, or you could design a complete branding package that includes the logo, all the stationery, social media branding, and that for $1,000. Or you can design the whole branding thing with stationery, social media, and create a brand style guide for the client for $1,500. So you present these 3 different options to the clients. Now, what happens is by giving the client these options to choose from, it reduces the chance of them actually shopping around for other design prices. So if they're the type of people that like to get 2 or 3 different prices from different people, you've just presented them with 3 different prices for different options. There's less chance that they will go look for another designer to get a quote from. And it helps them in their decision process. If you just give them one price and say, here, I'll do this for $500, they're going to wonder, it's like, gee, is that expensive? Is that cheap? But if you show them that I can do what you're asking for $500 or this for $1,000 and this for $1,500, now all of a sudden they think the $500 is way less than what they thought or less expensive than they thought it would end up being, even though it's the same amount of money. I don't know if I'm making sense there or not, but hopefully you get what I mean. Because it shows the client the value of the different tiers. Now, taking psychological reactance into consideration here, when you present your 3 pricing tiers, you do so in a way that the client feels their choices are actually being taken away. So you may be presenting them 3 choices, but if you make it look like choice 2 and choice 3 are really not for them, what you're actually doing is enticing them to look at them that much more closely. And you do it something like this. You would give the client a proposal and say, here's the proposal I prepared for you. Now, I know you can't afford it according to the budget for this project that you told me, but I want you to take a look at option 2 and 3 anyway. So at least you know what sort of things you may want to look into in the future when you can afford it. So telling the client they can't afford it, and that's not an insult because they've told you what their budget is. And if this pricing option is above that budget, you're basically repeating what they've already told you. So you're not insulting them in any way. But it will make them look at the other 2 options even closer. And you know what? I can't tell you how many times I've done this, where I've had a client tell me that their maximum budget, the most they can spend was X amount of dollars, only to end up having them approve a price that was sometimes double, if not triple, the original budget they told me, only because the more expensive option was much more appealing to them. And no, this is not swindling or conning the client. You're presenting it in a way that makes them feel like their choices are limited. And that's what the sociological reactance is all about. When they feel like their choices are being taken away or are limited, it will make them want it even more. Now, one thing that makes all human beings different are the things we as individuals like. Each of us has our own preferences. Each of us has our own things that we enjoy and we like. However, what binds us all together is our hate for when we're told that we can't have or that we won't do something. People want the freedom to choose for themselves. They want to be able to decide what they can or cannot do. They don't like other people telling them what they can or cannot do. And a good salesperson knows this and takes advantage of this tactic to help with their sales. So putting psychological reactance into practice, The way it works is to use phrases whenever you're talking to a client. Use phrases such as, you probably can't afford this, or you'll probably refuse this idea, or you might not like this idea, or this may not be for you, or you probably won't agree to this, or you may not be the best person for this. Anything that tells them that you don't think they're a good fit will make their ears perk up and make them look much more closely at what it is that you're telling them they're not a good fit for. Another great thing you could do is to simply say, do you know someone who may be interested in this? Or do you know somebody who may be suitable for this? Now, this way is really good because it's so much more subtle. You're not saying that the client isn't suitable themselves or that they're not a good fit. But by saying, do you know somebody else that may be, they feel like it's being implied, and therefore will think much more about it. This is why I've told you before on the podcast that the best way to get new work from old clients is not to ask them if they have any new work to give you, but instead to ask them if they know anyone who may need your expertise. I do this all the time, and I get more work from clients by asking them if they know anybody. Because yes, it jogs their memory, just the fact that I'm asking them. But by leaving them out of the equation, it makes them feel like, well, why can't I give you more work? And they usually do. So that would look something like, maybe even sending an email. Dear Jill, I hope the website I built for you is everything you hope for. I know you don't need anything from me right now, but if you know anyone who does, I'd be grateful if you would pass on my name and contact information. And there's a very high percentage that Jill will get back to me, not with the name of somebody else, although if she does, that's great. But usually she would get back to me with a new project that she either just thought up or something that had been at the back of her mind that she just hadn't gotten around to. And now it's a project I get to work on. And who knows? Maybe just saying, hi, Jill, I was just thinking of you. Talk to you later. Maybe that would have been it. But there's no harm in a little psychological reactance. So using phrases like this to help persuade people not only makes them more receptive to what you're offering, but it actually gives them an out, if you want to call it that, by giving them the freedom to choose for themselves. If you tell somebody, well, I know you can't afford it, and they truly can't afford it, they only have X amount of dollars to spend and that's it, then there's no harm done. You're just telling them something they already know, something they've already shared with you. And they could move along and not think anything of it, and they're not affronted because it's a fact. They can't afford it. But if that's not the case, if their budget is actually more flexible than they told you, or if they are more open than what they led you to believe, they may decide to hear you out when you say that this is not for them. And in most cases, that seals the deal. And you've just made a bigger sale. Congratulations. You're now doing better work and making more money at it. And that's the power of psychological reactance. Say they can't have it, and they'll want it even more. Now, have you ever tried this tactic in your pitches or when you're trying to make a sale? Let me know. Leave a comment for this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 237. And before I go, I want to remind you of the resource of the week. If you ever want to know what font a website is using, just visit fontofweb.com, type in the URL, and it'll let you know all the fonts being used on that page. So a great resource, another one-trick pony you can use. Add it to your arsenal of tools that'll make you a more efficient designer. And if you're thinking of joining the Resourceful Designer community, as I said at the beginning, it is now closed for a little while, at least till the beginning of 2021. But you can sign up to be on the waiting list to be notified when it does open, and I will take new members at that time on a first-come, first-served basis. And to do so, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community. So thank you very much. That's it for this week. I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your design business and reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.